The air in the first-class cabin crackled with an unbearable tension, thicker than the clouds outside. Every eye was glued to the scene unfolding between Mrs. Albright, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed to vibrate with indignation, and Mr. Elijah Vance, a man whose calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the storm brewing around him. Mrs. Albright's voice, sharp and piercing, cut through the hushed silence. You don't belong here. This is first class, not some common area for people like you." Her words, laced with venom, struck Elijah like a physical blow, even though he remained outwardly composed. She gestured wildly at his seat, then at his simple, yet elegant, travel bag. "Look at him. He's probably stolen that seat. Get him out of here. He's making me uncomfortable." The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, rushed over, her face a mask of polite concern, but her eyes held a flicker of something else, a hint of embarrassment, perhaps, or even fear. She tried to mediate, her voice soft and apologetic. "Ma'am, Mr. Vance has a valid ticket for this seat. There seems to be a misunderstanding." But Mrs. Albright wasn't having it. She stood up, her face contorted in a sneer, and deliberately, slowly, poured her glass of sparkling water directly onto Elijah's lap. The cold liquid spread quickly, soaking his expensive trousers and pooling on the plush seat. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Elijah flinched, but his eyes, though now filled with a deep, quiet hurt, remained fixed on Mrs. Albright. He didn't shout, didn't retaliate. He simply looked at her, a silent challenge in his gaze. Mrs. Albright, emboldened by his lack of reaction, smirked. "Now, perhaps you'll understand your place." Just then, a voice, deep and authoritative, boomed from the cockpit. "This is your captain speaking. We have an urgent situation. All passengers, please remain seated. Flight attendants, prepare for an unscheduled landing." The cabin plunged into a sudden, terrifying silence, broken only by the distant hum of the engines. Mrs. Albright, still standing, her triumphant smirk frozen on her face, looked around, confused. What could possibly be more urgent than her demand? And why was everyone suddenly looking at Elijah Vance with a mixture of awe and terror? Who was this man, truly, and what secret was about to be revealed that would shake the very foundations of their understanding? Weeks earlier, in the bustling heart of New York City, the story of Elijah Vance began not with a splash of water, but with the quiet hum of a high-tech office. Elijah, a man in his late 30s, possessed an unassuming charm that belied a razor-sharp mind. He wasn't flashy, didn't seek attention, and preferred the quiet solitude of his work to the clamor of social gatherings. His days were spent in a sleek, minimalist office, surrounded by multiple computer screens displaying complex lines of code and intricate data patterns. He was a cybersecurity expert, a digital guardian, working for a discreet, highly specialized firm known only as Sentinel Solutions. Their clients were the kind of people who needed absolute secrecy and impenetrable protection. Governments, multi-billion-dollar corporations, and individuals whose lives depended on keeping their digital footprints invisible. Elijah's current project was a nightmare. A sophisticated cyber attack, codenamed Shadowfall, had crippled the digital infrastructure of several major U.S. cities. Traffic lights were malfunctioning, hospital systems were glitching, and financial networks were teetering on the brink of collapse. The attacks were sporadic, unpredictable, and left no trace. It was like chasing ghosts in the machine. Elijah worked tirelessly, fueled by strong coffee and an unwavering sense of duty. He knew that behind every line of malicious code was a human being, and those human beings were causing real-world chaos and fear. One particularly late night, as the city lights twinkled outside his panoramic office window, Elijah stumbled upon something. A tiny, almost invisible anomaly in the vast ocean of data. It was a digital signature, a faint whisper in the noise, that led him down a rabbit hole of encrypted servers and hidden networks. He spent hours, days, even, meticulously unraveling the layers of code, each breakthrough revealing another, more complex puzzle. His partner, a jovial, quick-witted man named Marcus "Mac" Jones, often brought him takeout and cracked jokes to keep his spirits up. Mac was the perfect foil to Elijah's intensity, a master of social engineering and a brilliant hacker in his own right. "Anything, Mac asked one evening, leaning against the doorframe, a pizza box balanced precariously in one hand. "My stomach's starting to think about unionizing if it doesn't get fed soon." Elijah didn't look up from his screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I think I've found a pattern, Mac. It's not random. There's a rhythm to it, a signature. And it's leading me to a very unexpected place." Mac raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Unexpected how? Like a secret lair under a volcano, or just a really messy server farm in someone's basement?" Elijah finally leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. "More like a very well-funded, very well-hidden operation. And the signature, it's almost too clean. Too perfect. It's like they want us to find it, but only if we're looking in the exact right way." He paused, a frown creasing his brow. "And the data points, they're all connected to a specific type of high-frequency trading algorithm. The kind used by very powerful financial institutions. Their investigation led them down a path filled with shadowy figures and corporate espionage. They discovered that Shadowfall wasn't just about chaos, it was a smokescreen, a diversion. While cities struggled with digital outages, a massive, illicit financial transfer was taking place, siphoning billions of dollars from unsuspecting accounts into offshore havens. The attacks were designed to create enough panic and confusion to mask the real crime. Elijah and Mac worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters, their office becoming a second home. They traced the money, followed the digital breadcrumbs, and slowly, painstakingly, pieced together the puzzle. The mastermind behind Shadowfall was elusive, a ghost in the machine, but their digital signature was becoming clearer. It was a unique, almost artistic way of coding, a style that Elijah had only seen once before, years ago, in a highly classified government project. One rainy Tuesday, as Elijah was sifting through a particularly dense layer of encrypted communications, he found it. A name. A real name, attached to a burner email account that had been used to coordinate some of the smaller, more localized attacks. The name was Eleanor Albright. Elijah froze. Eleanor Albright. The name echoed in his mind, a chilling familiarity. He knew that name. He had heard it, seen it, in connection with something else. Something he couldn't quite place. His heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. He quickly cross-referenced the name with every database he had access to, both public and private. The results were staggering. Eleanor Albright was a prominent socialite, a philanthropist, a darling of the New York elite. She chaired numerous charity organizations, her face gracing the covers of glossy magazines. She was known for her impeccable taste, her sharp wit, and her occasional outbursts of temper, usually directed at service staff or anyone she deemed beneath her. "Mac," Elijah said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes still glued to the screen. "You're not going to believe this." Mac, who had been engrossed in trying to bypass a particularly stubborn firewall, looked up, sensing the shift in Elijah's tone. "What is it, E? Did you finally find that secret volcano lair?" "No," Elijah said, shaking his head slowly. "Worse. Much, much worse. The mastermind behind Shadowfall, it's Eleanor Albright." Mac stared at him, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "Eleanor Albright? The Eleanor Albright? The one who hosts those fancy galas and pretends to care about endangered butterflies?" Elijah nodded grimly. "The very same. And it gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. Her financial records are a mess. She's been losing money, a lot of it, in bad investments. And she's been secretly liquidating assets, trying to stay afloat. This Shadowfall operation, it's not just about siphoning money. It's about covering her tracks. It's about making sure no one looks too closely at her rapidly dwindling fortune." They spent the next few days building an airtight case. They gathered irrefutable evidence, digital fingerprints, transaction logs, encrypted messages, and even a few careless voice notes that Eleanor had sent, detailing her plans to her co-conspirators. The sheer audacity of her plan, the way she had used a global cyber attack to mask her personal financial woes, was breathtaking. It was a crime of immense scale, driven by desperation and a chilling sense of entitlement. Their findings were presented to a small, highly secretive task force composed of FBI agents, Homeland Security officials, and a few top-ranking military intelligence officers. The room was silent as Elijah laid out the evidence, his voice calm and methodical, detailing every step of Eleanor Albright's elaborate scheme. The officials listened, their faces grim, their expressions shifting from disbelief to cold fury. This wasn't just a financial crime, it was an act of domestic terrorism, disrupting critical infrastructure and sowing widespread panic. The decision was made. Eleanor Albright had to be apprehended immediately. But there was a problem. She was scheduled to fly out of the country on a private jet, heading to a non-extradition treaty nation within 24 hours. They had to act fast, discreetly, and without causing a panic. A public arrest at the airport would be a disaster, potentially tipping off her co-conspirators and causing a media frenzy that could jeopardize the entire investigation. Elijah, with his unparalleled understanding of her digital habits, suggested a daring plan. He knew Eleanor Albright was obsessed with her online presence, constantly checking her emails and social media, even during flights. He proposed a way to subtly manipulate her flight manifest, ensuring she would be on a commercial flight, not her private jet, and that he would be on the same flight. It was a risky move, putting himself in close proximity to a dangerous, desperate criminal, but it was the only way to ensure a quiet, contained arrest. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Vance?" the lead FBI agent, Agent Miller, asked, his eyes narrowed in concern. "It's a high-risk operation. She's proven to be ruthless." Elijah nodded, his jaw set. "I'm sure, Agent. I know her digital footprint better than anyone. And I know how her mind works. She's arrogant. She'll never expect it." And so, the stage was set. Elijah, armed with a hidden communication device and a carefully constructed cover story, boarded the flight. He watched as Eleanor Albright, resplendent in her designer clothes, swept into the first-class cabin, oblivious to the trap closing around her. He took his seat, a few rows behind her, and waited. The flight took off, soaring into the sky, and Elijah felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. He knew that soon, the calm would shatter. He just didn't know how, or when. He had anticipated her arrogance, her self-importance, but he hadn't fully prepared for the raw, unbridled prejudice that would erupt from her, turning a simple flight into a public spectacle of humiliation. He had expected a quiet, professional apprehension, but what unfolded was far more personal, far more ugly. And as the plane reached cruising altitude, and the flight attendants began their service, Elijah knew, with a chilling certainty, that the true identity of Eleanor Albright was about to be revealed, not just to him, but to everyone on that plane, in a way no one could have ever predicted. The humiliation was just the beginning. The real shock was yet to come. The question remained, what would happen when the captain's voice announced the unscheduled landing, and the truth about Eleanor Albright, and indeed, about Elijah Vance himself, was laid bare for all to see? The captain's announcement hung in the air, a stark, chilling premonition that silenced even the most indignant passengers. Mrs. Albright, her face a mixture of confusion and annoyance, finally sank back into her seat, her earlier triumph deflating like a punctured balloon. The flight attendants, their faces pale but professional, moved swiftly through the cabin, their movements crisp and urgent. They weren't just preparing for an unscheduled landing, they were preparing for something more, something that sent a ripple of unease through the first-class cabin. Elijah Vance, his trousers still damp from Mrs. Albright's petty assault, remained calm, his eyes fixed on the back of her head. He knew this was it. The moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of weeks of tireless work. He subtly adjusted his position, his hand hovering near the hidden communication device strapped to his wrist. He could feel the faint vibration, a prearranged signal from Agent Miller, confirming that the ground team was in position. The plane began its descent, a slow, graceful arc towards an undisclosed location. The city lights below, once a glittering tapestry, now seemed like a web, closing in on its unsuspecting prey. As the plane touched down, not at a commercial airport, but at a private, heavily secured airstrip, the truth began to dawn on the other passengers. This was no ordinary diversion. The cabin doors opened, not to a jet bridge, but to a phalanx of stern-faced FBI agents, their dark suits a stark contrast to the bright runway lights. They boarded the plane with a quiet, efficient precision, their eyes scanning the cabin, their movements purposeful and coordinated. Agent Miller, his face a grim mask, led the way, his gaze locking onto Elijah's for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. It was a look of confirmation, of a plan set in motion. Mrs. Albright, her initial confusion turning to a dawning horror, watched as the agents moved towards her. She looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief, searching for an explanation, a way to make sense of the surreal scene unfolding before her. Her gaze fell on Elijah, and for the first time, she saw him not as a target for her prejudice, but as something else, something she couldn't quite comprehend. There was a quiet authority in his posture, a steely resolve in his eyes that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Agent Miller stopped beside her seat, his voice low but firm. "Eleanor Albright, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit acts of domestic terrorism, wire fraud, and multiple violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." He gestured to two other agents, who moved to flank her, their hands ready to secure her. Mrs. Albright's face, which had been a canvas of shock, now contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is absurd. A mistake. I am Eleanor Albright. I am a respected member of this community. You can't do this." Her voice, once a weapon of social superiority, was now a shrill, desperate plea. She looked at Elijah, her eyes blazing with a new, more potent hatred. This is your fault. You did this. Who are you?" Elijah stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at Mrs. Albright, his expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "My name is Elijah Vance," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying through the silent cabin. "And I'm the man who's been tracking your every digital move for the past 3 weeks. I'm the man who unraveled your entire Shadowfall operation. And I'm the man who is going to make sure you spend the rest of your life paying for the chaos and fear you've caused." He then turned to Agent Miller, his voice dropping to a professional, almost clinical tone. "Agent, she has a secondary communication device, a burner phone, hidden in the lining of her handbag. And there's a micro SD card, containing encrypted financial data, sewn into the hem of her jacket. Be careful. She's more resourceful than she looks." The revelation hung in the air, a stunning, final blow. The other passengers, who had been watching in stunned silence, now looked at Elijah with a mixture of awe and respect. The man they had seen humiliated, belittled, and assaulted was not just an innocent victim. He was a hero, a digital knight who had brought down a powerful, dangerous criminal. Mrs. Albright, her face ashen, her body trembling, finally seemed to understand the true gravity of her situation. She had underestimated him, not just as a man, but as a force of justice. And now, as the agents led her away, her hands cuffed behind her back, her reign of terror, both personal and digital, was finally over. The aftermath of Eleanor Albright's arrest was a whirlwind of activity. The FBI, with the evidence provided by Elijah and Mac, moved swiftly to dismantle her entire network. Co-conspirators were rounded up, offshore accounts were frozen, and the stolen billions were slowly, painstakingly, recovered. The story of Shadowfall and the dramatic mid-air arrest became a media sensation, a modern-day tale of hubris and downfall. Elijah, true to his nature, remained in the shadows, his name and face carefully protected from the public eye. He was a ghost in the machine, a silent guardian, and that was exactly how he liked it. But the case wasn't over. Not yet. As Elijah and Mac delved deeper into the encrypted data recovered from Eleanor's micro-SD card, they discovered something far more sinister than financial fraud. They found a series of coded messages, a digital breadcrumb trail that led to a much larger, more dangerous organization. Shadowfall wasn't just about one woman's desperate attempt to cover her financial losses. It was a test run, a proof of concept for a much larger, more devastating attack. The organization, known only as the Syndicate, was a shadowy cabal of powerful individuals, corrupt politicians, rogue intelligence agents, and ruthless corporate executives, who sought to manipulate global events for their own personal gain. They were the puppet masters, pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and Eleanor Albright was just one of their many pawns. The coded messages spoke of a new operation, codenamed Crimson Sky, a plan to unleash a series of coordinated cyber and physical attacks on major cities across the globe. The goal was to create a level of chaos and instability that would allow the Syndicate to seize control of critical infrastructure, manipulate financial markets, and essentially hold the world hostage. The messages were fragmented, heavily encrypted, and filled with cryptic references, but the intent was clear. Crimson Sky was a doomsday scenario, a plan that could plunge the world into a new dark age. Elijah and Mac worked around the clock, their office once again becoming a war room. They brought in their most trusted colleagues, a small, elite team of cybersecurity experts and intelligence analysts, and together, they began the arduous task of deciphering the Syndicate's plans. They knew they were in a race against time. The coded messages hinted at a specific date, a deadline, and it was fast approaching. One evening, as Elijah was staring at a particularly complex piece of code, a string of numbers and symbols that seemed to mock him with its insolence, he had a breakthrough. He recognized a pattern, a familiar digital signature that he had seen before, years ago, in a completely different context. It was the signature of a notorious hacker, a digital phantom known only as Nix. Nix was a legend in the dark web, a master of disguise and deception, a ghost who could slip through the most secure firewalls without leaving a trace. Nix had been responsible for some of the most audacious cyberattacks in history, but had always managed to stay one step ahead of the law. And now, it seemed, Nix was working for the syndicate. "Mac," Elijah said, his voice tense with a mixture of excitement and dread. "I know who's behind the encryption. It's Nix." Mac, who had been trying to brute force his way into a locked server, spun around in his chair, his eyes wide. "Nix? Are you serious? I thought Nix was a myth, a boogeyman that hackers tell their kids about at night." "Nix is real," Elijah said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "And if Nix is involved, then Crimson Sky is more than just a plan. It's a promise of chaos." Their investigation took on a new urgency. They were no longer just fighting a shadowy organization, they were fighting a legend. They knew that to stop Crimson Sky, they had to find Nix. But how do you find a ghost? How do you catch a shadow? Elijah, using his deep understanding of Nix's coding style, began to build a digital trap. He created a series of honeypots, decoy servers filled with fake data, designed to lure Nix in. He laid a trail of digital breadcrumbs, a series of carefully crafted puzzles and challenges, designed to appeal to Nix's ego, to Nix's love of the game. It was a dangerous gamble. If Nix detected the trap, they would disappear, and Crimson Sky would be unstoppable. But it was a risk Elijah had to take. Days turned into nights, and the pressure mounted. The deadline for Crimson Sky was just a few days away. The team was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline, but they refused to give up. They were the last line of defense, the silent guardians standing between order and chaos. And then, one night, it happened. A flicker of activity on one of the honeypot servers. A faint, almost imperceptible digital whisper. Nix had taken the bait. Elijah's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the screen, his eyes tracking Nix's movements through the digital labyrinth he had created. Nix was good, incredibly good, moving with a speed and precision that was almost inhuman. But Elijah was better. He had anticipated Nix's every move, had laid a series of digital tripwires and alarms that would alert him to Nix's presence. He followed Nix through the layers of deception, a silent, deadly dance in the digital realm. He watched as Nix bypassed firewalls, cracked encryption, and moved closer and closer to the heart of the trap. And then, just as Nix was about to access the final most tempting piece of fake data, Elijah sprang the trap. He triggered a series of cascading firewalls, a digital cage that slammed shut around Nix, trapping them in a virtual prison. He had them. He had caught the ghost. But as he began to trace Nix's location, to pinpoint their physical whereabouts, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. The signal wasn't coming from a remote, hidden location. It wasn't coming from a secret lair or a fortified bunker. It was coming from inside their own building. From inside Sentinel Solutions. Nix wasn't just an outside threat. They were a traitor, a wolf in sheep's clothing, hiding in plain sight. And as Elijah looked at the location data, a single horrifying thought crossed his mind. Who could it be? Who among his trusted colleagues, his friends, was the ghost in the machine? The enemy was not at the gates. The enemy was already inside. And as the realization washed over him, he knew that the real battle, the battle for the soul of his organization, had just begun. The question was no longer how to stop Crimson Sky, but who to trust in a world where everyone was a suspect. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The ultimate betrayal was yet to be revealed, and the consequences would be more devastating than anyone could have ever imagined. The real extreme event was not the one that had just occurred, but the one that was about to unfold, a storm of deception and betrayal that would test the very limits of Elijah's courage and resolve. The enemy was closer than he thought, and the next move would determine everything. The game was far from over. It had just entered its most dangerous, most unpredictable phase. And as Elijah stared at the screen, a single name flashing in his mind, he knew that the next chapter would be the deadliest of them all. The question was, Would he be able to stop it in time? The glowing red on Elijah's screen pulsed with a terrifying rhythm, pinpointing Nix's location not in some distant, shadowy corner of the internet, but right there, within the very walls of Sentinel Solutions. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and dread. Who could it be? Who among his trusted colleagues, the people he worked alongside every day, was the ghost in the machine, the traitor known as Nix? The thought was a bitter pill to swallow, a betrayal that cut deeper than any cyber attack. He quickly cross-referenced the IP address with the internal network logs. The results flashed on his screen, confirming his worst fears. The signal was coming from Marcus Mac Jones's workstation. Mac, his jovial, quick-witted partner. The man who brought him takeout, cracked jokes, and had been by his side through countless all-nighters. The revelation hit Elijah like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. It couldn't be. Not Mac. It had to be a mistake, a clever trick by Nix to frame someone else. But the evidence was undeniable. The digital fingerprints, the unique coding style, the subtle nuances in the network traffic, it all pointed to Mac. Elijah felt a cold knot of despair tighten in his stomach. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted someone who was secretly working against him, against everything they stood for? The betrayal was immense, a gaping wound in his trust. He knew he had to act, and act fast. Crimson Sky was still a ticking time bomb, and with Nix operating from within, the threat was even greater. He couldn't confront Mac directly, not yet. He needed more proof, something irrefutable that would stand up to scrutiny. He also needed to protect the sensitive information on his own systems, in case Mac realized he had been discovered. Elijah began to meticulously gather more evidence, working in a silent, methodical fury. He accessed Mac's network activity logs, his email communications, even his personal files, searching for any clue, any anomaly that would explain this devastating betrayal. He found encrypted messages, disguised as innocent work-related files, exchanged with unknown entities. He found detailed plans for Crimson Sky, far more intricate and devastating than what Eleanor Albright had revealed. And he found a hidden folder, filled with financial transactions, massive sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts, all linked to the syndicate. It was all there, laid bare. Mac's greed, his ambition, his willingness to betray his friends, his company, and his country for personal gain. The jovial facade, the witty remarks, the camaraderie, it had all been a lie, a carefully constructed mask to hide a dark and dangerous secret. Elijah felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The man he had considered a brother, a trusted ally, was nothing more than a mercenary, a puppet of the syndicate. As he worked, a sudden sharp knock echoed on his office door. Elijah's heart leaped into his throat. He quickly minimized the incriminating files, his fingers trembling slightly. "Come in," he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The door opened, and there stood Mac, a wide, easy smile on his face, holding 2 steaming coffee cups. "Hey, thought you could use a pick-me-up. You look like you've been wrestling a digital dragon." Elijah forced a smile, his mind racing. He had to play along, act normal. "Thanks, Mac. You're a lifesaver. Just hitting a wall with this last encryption layer." Mac walked over, placing one of the cups on Elijah's desk. His eyes, usually so warm and friendly, seemed to linger on Elijah's screen for a fraction of a second too long. Elijah felt a prickle of unease. Had Mac noticed anything? Was he testing him? "Yeah, this Nix character is a real piece of work," Mac said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "Good thing we're on their tail, right? Almost got 'em cornered." Elijah nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. It tasted bitter, like betrayal. Almost. Just a few more pieces to put together. He watched Mac carefully, trying to read his expression, to find any crack in his facade. But Mac was a master of deception, his face an unreadable mask. The thought that Mac had been playing him for so long, right under his nose, made Elijah's blood boil. "Well, don't work too hard, buddy," Mac said, clapping him on the shoulder. The touch felt cold, alien. "We'll catch him. We always do." He turned and walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Elijah watched him go, a cold dread settling in his chest. Mac knew. He had to know. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. Elijah knew he couldn't wait any longer. He had to expose Mac, but he couldn't risk a direct confrontation. He needed to alert Agent Miller, discreetly, without tipping off Mac. He opened a secure communication channel, a hidden backdoor he had built into the system years ago, a failsafe for emergencies like this. He typed out a brief, urgent message, detailing his findings and Mac's betrayal. He attached the irrefutable evidence he had gathered, the transaction logs, the encrypted plans, the digital fingerprints. He hit send, a sense of grim determination settling over him. Just as the message sent, a blaring alarm ripped through the building. Red lights flashed, sirens wailed, and an automated voice echoed through the intercom, "Intruder alert! All personnel, remain calm and follow evacuation procedures." Elijah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a drill. This was Crimson Sky. And Mac, the traitor, was at the heart of it. He looked at his screen. The digital cage he had built around Nix was gone. Mac had escaped. And now, he was unleashing chaos. He heard shouts from the hallway, the sounds of commotion and panic. He knew he couldn't evacuate. He had to stop Mac, had to prevent Crimson Sky from being fully unleashed. He grabbed a small, encrypted hard drive from his desk, containing backup copies of all his research and a few experimental countermeasures he had been developing. He slipped it into his pocket, his mind racing, formulating a plan. He stepped out of his office, into the chaotic hallway. People were running, screaming, pushing their way towards the emergency exits. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning electronics. He saw Mac, standing near the main server room, a sinister smirk on his face, his fingers flying across a portable keyboard. He was surrounded by a small team of heavily armed individuals, their faces obscured by tactical masks. They weren't just hackers, they were soldiers, mercenaries, ready to unleash a physical attack alongside the digital one. "Mac!" Elijah shouted, his voice cutting through the din, "Stop this! You don't have to do this!" Mac looked up, his smirk widening. "Elijah! Always the hero. Always trying to save the day. You're too late. Crimson Sky has begun. And there's nothing you can do to stop it." He gestured to his armed guards. "Get him. Don't let him interfere." The guards moved towards Elijah, their weapons raised. Elijah knew he couldn't fight them all. He was a cybersecurity expert, not a soldier. He turned and ran, dodging through the panicked crowd, the sounds of gunfire echoing behind him. He had to get to the main control room, had to find a way to shut down Crimson Sky, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The building was a maze of flashing lights and blaring alarms, a digital battlefield where the fate of the world hung in the balance. He ducked into a maintenance shaft, the narrow space offering a temporary reprieve from the chaos. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the guards above him, their voices barking orders. He knew they were closing in. He had to be smart, had to use his knowledge of the building systems against them. He pulled out his hidden communication device, hoping Agent Miller had received his message, hoping help was on the way. As he crawled through the cramped, dusty shaft, he heard a new sound, a low, rhythmic thumping that grew louder with each passing second. It was the sound of a helicopter, hovering directly above the building. Was it the FBI? Or was it more of the Syndicate's forces, coming to reinforce Mac? He couldn't tell. The uncertainty gnawed at him, adding to the immense pressure. He reached a junction in the shaft, a small opening that led to a rarely used server room. It was a risky move, but it was his best shot. He squeezed through the opening, dropping silently onto the cold metal floor. The server room was dark, filled with the hum of powerful machines. He quickly accessed a terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to find a backdoor, a way to override Mac's commands, to shut down Crimson Sky. But as he worked, a shadow fell over him. He looked up, his heart sinking. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the flashing red lights of the hallway, was Mac. He was no longer smirking. His face was grim, determined, and his eyes held a cold, calculating glint. He held a pistol in his hand, pointed directly at Elijah. "I knew you'd come here, Elijah," Mac said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth, replaced by a chilling calm. "Always the hero. Always trying to stop the inevitable. But you can't stop this. Crimson Sky is too big. Too powerful." Elijah slowly raised his hands, his mind racing, searching for an escape, A way out of this impossible situation. Mac, please. Think about what you're doing. This isn't you. You're better than this. Mac scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Better? I'm finally getting what I deserve, Elijah. Years of being in your shadow, years of being the sidekick. No more. After Crimson Sky, I'll be the one in charge. The one pulling the strings. He took a step closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. It's a shame, really. We could have been a great team. But you always had to be the moral compass, the one who played by the rules. Rules are for the weak, Elijah. And now, you're going to pay the price for your weakness. Elijah's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything, any advantage. His gaze fell on a loose power cable, snaking across the floor, leading to a massive server rack. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all he had. You're wrong, Mac, Elijah said, his voice firm, his eyes locking with Mac's. Rules are what separate us from the monsters. And you, Mac, you've become a monster. With a sudden explosive burst of movement, Elijah lunged forward, not at Mac, but at the power cable. He grabbed it, pulling with all his might, yanking it free from the server rack. A shower of sparks erupted, and the room plunged into darkness, the hum of the servers dying down to an eerie silence. The sudden darkness disoriented Mac, giving Elijah a precious few seconds. He heard Mac curse, then the sound of a struggle. Elijah scrambled away, blindly searching for an exit, for a way to escape the now pitch-black room. He could hear Mac fumbling in the darkness, trying to regain his bearings. He knew he had to get out, had to find a way to stop Crimson Sky before it was too late. The fate of millions, perhaps billions, rested on his shoulders. And as he stumbled through the darkness, the sounds of Mac's frustrated shouts echoing behind him, he knew that the next few moments would determine everything. The ultimate confrontation was upon them, a battle not just for control of the network, but for the very soul of Sentinel Solutions. And as Elijah burst through a hidden emergency exit into the chaotic, smoke-filled night, he knew that the real fight, the one that would decide the fate of the world, had just begun. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, but whether they were coming to help him or to stop him, he couldn't tell. The extreme event had just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The question remained, would he be able to stop Mac and Crimson Sky before it was too late? The next chapter would reveal all. Elijah sank to his knees, the searing pain in his shoulder a fiery brand, his vision blurring at the edges. Mac stood over him, his pistol still aimed, his face a grim mask of triumph. "You may have stopped Crimson Sky, Elijah," he sneered, his voice cold and hard, devoid of any past camaraderie. "But you won't stop me. And you won't live to tell the tale." Elijah's mind raced, even as his body screamed in protest. He was wounded, vulnerable, and Mac was closing in for the kill. The sirens outside grew louder, closer, a tantalizing promise of help that might arrive too late. He looked up at Mac, his eyes searching for any flicker of the man he once knew, any hint of the friend who had shared countless late-night pizzas and bad jokes. There was nothing. Only a cold, calculating resolve. "Mac," Elijah rasped, trying to buy time, trying to find an opening. "Think about what you're doing. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about everything. You're destroying lives." Mac scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Lives? What about my life, Elijah? Years of being in your shadow, years of being the loyal sidekick. While you got all the glory, I was stuck doing the grunt work. No more. After this, I'll be the one in charge. The one pulling the strings." He took another step closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's a shame, really. We could have been a great team. But you always had to be the moral compass, the one who played by the rules. Rules are for the weak, Elijah. And now, you're going to pay the price for your weakness." Elijah's gaze darted around the room, searching desperately for anything, any advantage. His eyes fell on the fire extinguisher he had used, lying discarded on the floor. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was all he had. He knew he couldn't fight Mac head-on, not in his current state. He needed a distraction, a way to disarm him. "You're wrong, Mac," Elijah said, his voice firm, despite the pain. "Rules are what separate us from the monsters. And you, Mac, you've become a monster. With a sudden explosive burst of movement, Elijah lunged, not at Mac, but at the fire extinguisher. He grabbed it, swinging it wildly, aiming for Mac's gun hand. Mac, caught off guard, stumbled backward, the pistol clattering to the floor. The sound of the gun hitting the concrete echoed loudly in the silent server room. Elijah didn't waste a second. He kicked the pistol away, sending it skittering across the floor, out of Mac's reach. Mac roared in frustration, lunging at Elijah, his fists clenched. He was bigger, stronger, and fueled by a desperate rage. He tackled Elijah, sending them both crashing to the floor. The pain in Elijah's shoulder flared, a blinding agony, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. They grappled in the darkness, a desperate, brutal struggle. Mac landed a punch to Elijah's jaw, sending his head snapping back. Stars exploded behind Elijah's eyes, but he fought back, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a burning desire for justice. He managed to twist, using his legs to trip Mac, sending him sprawling. Elijah scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the room for a weapon, anything to even the odds. His gaze fell on a heavy wrench, lying near a disconnected server panel. He lunged for it, his fingers closing around the cold metal. Mac, seeing his intent, roared and charged, a wild, desperate glint in his eyes. He was no longer the calculating hacker. He was a cornered animal, fighting for his life. As Mac lunged, Elijah swung the wrench, not to kill, but to incapacitate. The heavy metal connected with Mac's knee, a sickening crack echoing through the room. Mac screamed, a guttural cry of pain, and collapsed to the floor, clutching his injured leg. The fight was over. Elijah stood over him, panting, the wrench heavy in his hand, his body aching, but his mind clear. Just then, the server room door burst open, and Agent Miller, followed by a team of heavily armed FBI agents, stormed in. Their weapons were raised, their faces grim. They took in the scene, Elijah, wounded but standing, and Mac, writhing on the floor, clutching his injured knee. Agent Miller's eyes met Elijah's, a silent acknowledgment of the battle won. "Elijah, are you all right?" Agent Miller rushed to his side, his concern evident. "We heard the shot. We were worried." Elijah nodded, wincing as he moved his shoulder. "I'm fine, Agent. Just a scratch. Mac, he's Nix. He's the one behind Crimson Sky. And he just tried to kill me." The agents moved swiftly, securing Mac, who continued to curse and struggle, even as they cuffed him. They found the pistol Elijah had kicked away, and the stylized raven symbol on Mac's uniform, confirming Elijah's accusations. The server room, once a battlefield, was now a scene of quiet, efficient law enforcement. As the medics arrived to tend to Elijah's shoulder, Agent Miller approached him, a look of profound gratitude on his face. "You saved us, Elijah. You saved countless lives. We never would have caught him, not without you." Elijah simply nodded, his gaze fixed on Mac, who was being led away, his face a mask of defeat and hatred. The betrayal still stung, a deep, festering wound, but it was overshadowed by a sense of grim satisfaction. Justice had been served. The ghost in the machine had been caught. In the days that followed, the full extent of the syndicate's operations was uncovered. With Mac's capture and the evidence Elijah had painstakingly gathered, the FBI and other international agencies launched a massive, coordinated crackdown. Corrupt politicians were exposed, rogue intelligence agents were apprehended, and ruthless corporate executives faced the full force of the law. The stolen billions were recovered, and the digital infrastructure of cities around the world was secured. Crimson Sky, the doomsday scenario, had been averted, thanks to the quiet heroism of one man. Elijah Vance, true to his nature, remained in the shadows. He refused the accolades, the media attention, the offers of lucrative positions in government. He was a silent guardian, a digital knight, and that was exactly how he liked it. He returned to Sentinel Solutions, his office once again a place of quiet contemplation, his multiple computer screens displaying complex lines of code and intricate data patterns. He continued his work, ever vigilant, ever dedicated to protecting the digital world from the shadows that lurked within. His shoulder healed, the scar a permanent reminder of the betrayal and the battle. But the deeper wounds, the ones of trust and friendship, would take longer to mend. He knew that some betrayals leave scars that never truly fade. Yet, he also knew that he had done the right thing. He had chosen justice over loyalty, and in doing so, He had saved countless lives. He had faced the monster, and he had won. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be in the world of cybersecurity. The news cycles moved on, new threats emerged, and the memory of Crimson Sky faded into the background, a chilling reminder of what could have been. Elijah continued his work, a silent sentinel, ever watchful, ever ready. He knew that the fight against the shadows was a never-ending one, a constant battle between order and chaos. But he was ready. He was always ready. And as for Eleanor Albright, her trial was a media circus. The evidence against her was overwhelming, thanks to Elijah's meticulous work. She was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to a long prison term. Her public humiliation on the plane, the moment that had seemed so shocking at the time, was now just a footnote in the much larger story of her downfall. The racist white woman who had humiliated a black man on a plane had, in the end, revealed not just his true identity as a hero, but her own true identity as a criminal. And in that revelation, justice, in its own quiet way, had prevailed. The story of Elijah Vance, the silent guardian, and the racist white woman, Eleanor Albright, became a legend whispered in the halls of cybersecurity, a testament to the fact that true power lies not in arrogance or prejudice, but in integrity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The end.